I'd like to talk briefly about LOCA projects rather than just LOCA theory. We've got some interesting things going on. The original idea behind LOCA was a set of local communities, local economies, where neighbours provide for their own and each other's needs to a greater degree than is currently the case. And the original idea also contained the concept of an international network of such localised economies, so that you get the benefits of international communication, international comparisons of different results and outcomes, and learning amongst all these and between all these communities and community members. And we're seeing advances on both fronts. For instance, something we're doing around housing, localising the housing sector of the economy, is opening up international discussions around what I would call regenerative economics in that particular sector, and social benefits and ecological benefits, which can be enhanced perhaps more by operating at a local level, but even more so if lots of people doing so at a local level collaborate in learning and comparing notes on an international level. So let me give you an example. Inferior housing, there's been a recent legal case in the UK, can often create results like the tragic death of a young boy in London from the inhalation of mould spores. So damp, lack of insulation, lack of the ability to heat cost effectively, particularly when the prices of fossil fuels are going up so fast, mean there's a correlation between health and poverty, which we've always known, but this is a specific example. So now, looking at a means by which to localise the improvement of housing by retrofitting with better insulation, renewable energy, proper airtighting and various other techniques might sound expensive, but actually the cost to the taxpayer of not doing so, apart from all the suffering that's caused by leaving people in this inferior housing, the cost to the taxpayer of not doing so is enormous, because health disbenefits can be so bad that, as in this case, deaths are caused. And where they're not caused, we're looking at literally decades of difference between people in inferior housing and people in adequate or superior housing in these terms, so that 20 years is not atypical as the period in which the taxpayer has to fund the attempts to repair or maintain or build health in the people who are stuck with inferior housing. So it's interesting, social impact bonds that take advantage of the savings to taxpayers in such cases as this can help to fund the net zero retrofitting of inferior housing for people who couldn't have afforded it themselves otherwise, and thereby create benefits in the public sector, benefits in the private sector, benefits locally, and as it spreads from learning between communities, benefits globally. LOCA is working with an organisation called Pathway Points, who are in the housing sector and whose role in the housing sector is to enable retrofits of houses, existing houses, to net zero by helping Generation Z people who've been unable to get onto the property ladder to get onto the property ladder and to be part of the retrofitting phenomenon that needs to happen. And so working with pension funds who used to invest in government bonds and might do better to invest in housing, what they're saying is, if the Generation Z people who've been paying their rent for several years but can't afford the deposit for a mortgage because food prices, gas prices, electricity prices and so on are pushing that ability to save further and further away, having demonstrated that they've successfully paid without ever defaulting rent at so much a month for, say, 2 years, can join a club, it's called Pathway Points, or Pathway Points Club, and their rent payments create the means to buy the houses that they will then contract to pay rent on for decades, as you would a mortgage, but it's not a mortgage. And the genius of this is that at the front end, if you retrofit these houses to net zero carbon, the utility bills of the Generation Z people who now are on the property ladder and are acquiring their homes over a period of several decades by a new means, the utility bills they're paying are so much lower that the cost of paying rent stroke purchase instalments, one day at a time, each day as a pathway point, are reduced considerably, because very high utility bills as of today are now being halved or whatever. And the net result of this is that we get to achieve the massive carbon improvements at a community level in houses one at a time, but at the same time get Generation Z on the property ladder and fix the pension problem that government bonds has created for the boomers, who could be said to have caused the climate problem and the real estate problem in one generation. Pensions, for a very long time, have been predominantly invested in government bonds. Government bonds pay typically 0%, but they're guaranteed. So pensions, obviously, being very important funds, which must guarantee an income to those people who are no longer being paid for work later in life, that's where pension funds tend to have been invested. But housing, despite all the turbulence and volatility in the housing market, tends to have appreciated in value year on year on average somewhere around 5%. So if pension funds are invested in housing rather than in government bonds, then although there's upping and downing, the overall trend being upwards at about 5% average, pensioners get a better and safer, more assured pension, while at the same time being part of the solution to the Generation Z's inability hitherto to get onto the real estate ladder. Social impact bonds, based on the savings to the taxpayer created when people who might be doing 0 hours contract type work right now, van driving, shelf stacking, whatever they're doing, low paid work, can be trained to be fitters of photovoltaic equipment, fitters of triple glazed windows, fitters of insulation, and so on. Highly paid, big demand, growing demand employment, high skill, high income. Those people can now actually be part of the solution, and being less impoverished, can live in better quality housing as part of this whole movement. And in doing so, the health benefits to them save the taxpayer a fortune, and that's where the money comes from via the social impact bond. If at a local level you can become a homeowner, or you can become a retrofitter of net zero housing, or you can become an apprentice training to become one of those people in the local economy, then at local level, in community, we can see people doing exactly what LOCA's always been designed to do, which is to help people within communities, networked across the entire world, but within communities at local level, providing for more of their own and each other's needs in education, in housing, in energy, in food, in fashion, in furniture, in the arts, and in all these other areas.